give a couple of minutes for everyone to click on mute there. And just keeping your video off. The recording has just started for the presentation. Thanks, Darren, for that. My name's Paul Milo, the Head of Member Services for Cricket Victoria. I'll be sort of driving the session this morning. Darren Anderson will also be joining in to answer some of the questions. We have around about 250 dialing in, so it's going to be a little bit tough to answer all of the questions through the chat. But if you do have any, use the chat function that we do have. But and we'll touch on how to do that for those unfamiliar with Microsoft Teams. But firstly, just thanks for joining us. We know that for those in the regional areas, which this morning's about, I guess it's your first taste of freedom. It's a great weekend. You've moved into step 3 and you're stuck inside listening to a webinar. So congratulations for, I guess, putting your clubs first and giving up a little bit of your Saturday morning to listen into the protocols for the season ahead. We're really excited about the stage that we're at from a COVID perspective. It was obviously from a state perspective a month or two ago looking pretty dire, but the work that's been done to get us to step 3, it's really, really exciting. We put out a note a couple of days ago to say we're here to help. We want cricket to start, and what we'll work through this morning is how to actually try and make that happen. So thanks for dialing in. In terms of the housekeeping this morning, as I just try and click over to the next slide, please remain on mute through the session. Keep the video off. Certainly encourage questions throughout the course of the morning through the chat function. And as I said earlier, the session is being recorded. So for those that can't dial in, or even for those on this morning, you don't need to scribble notes down. We will share the recording ASAP as well. So just whilst we're meeting online this morning, I'd certainly like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the various lands throughout Victoria in which the meeting's taking place, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and also those that are on the call this morning. Where we can't get to all of your specific questions this morning, and we appreciate those that have submitted their questions. We feel that we've got most of that covered through the presentations, but if something comes up this morning that you're not 100% sure of, reach out to your area staff. Birthday boy Jason Mathers, shout out to you, Jason, and Emma, who you heard from before from the southeast. But obviously we've got people through all parts of Victoria, and many of those names will be familiar with those on the calls today, but reach out to your regional staff. Where it does relate to anything from a coaching perspective and ideas of how you can work through different training drills, and we'll talk about training group sizes for regional areas. This morning will be mostly about regional because Metro is still in a stage of lockdown with no training possible, and we'll touch on where we're at for Metro, but certainly the focus for this morning's on regional. So certainly reaching out to some of those guys if you want to pick their brains about some of the coaching space as well. This, and we'll actually, in the next couple of minutes, I'll take you straight through to this particular website, but our website's been updated with all of the current material that's available, and we'll talk through the plan, and we'll talk through all the other sections of where to go to get back in a COVID environment, but certainly going to that cricketvictoria.com.au. On the home page is where our editable guide is already, but getting into the support area and clubs and associations, there's a range of resources that are available there to help clubs get back. So what we'll work through this morning is an editable association and club COVID-19 plan. You will see quite often, and for those that have got for pretty much anyone looking to open their social rooms, the council will be looking for a COVID plan, potentially sponsors or even parents or those within the committee. So one, it'll certainly help drive the protocols for all the clubs and associations out there, but you will be asked for a plan as well. You're certainly welcome to develop your own plan, absolutely. This is just going to be a template that we'll work through to make it easier for you. It's literally will take a couple of minutes to actually just put your name on it. That's your plan. We'll then talk through the process of needing to endorse that and promote that and live and breathe the plan. But effectively, we've done all the hard work for you to actually have an editable plan that's really, really simple to make your own. Then obviously the challenge becomes living and breathing that. We'll talk through training night protocols and training session protocols. I'm sure there's a lot of clubs out there that are really, really keen to get started, and we'll talk through some of those things to try and make that happen as soon as possible. The match day guide, and we'll also give a little bit of an overview as to what we've recommended through the Country Cricket League about association seasons as well, and a bit of advice as to what we're doing at in other comps that we're involved with, facility access, and also questions that you may have come up through the chat as well. So I'll be continuing to sort of talk through everything. Darren will be monitoring the chat and may come in to answer some of that or to add some extra context to what I'm saying. But that's essentially what we want to talk through. So what I'll do now is just move across to this is where the documents are that we have is. This is where you can actually download the editable plan. And we will talk through, and we'll work through the entire document through most of the session this morning. There's a fair bit to cover, so we'll certainly get into it pretty quickly. But just a little bit of context to the work that we've done over the last few months. When COVID hit, Sport Australia, Cricket Australia, the ICC, Cricket Victoria, everyone swung into action as to what was required. Sport Australia set out protocols for high performance and community cricket. So the high performance is really what you see at the elite level. One of the big messages that we want to get across this morning and through these webinars is what we'll see at community cricket this year will look different to what's on TV. And there's a reason for that, because the players at elite level are effectively in a bubble. We know, and we've seen for those that most in Victoria might follow the footy, you know the sort of the protocols that they're living in and the hubs and the isolation that they have to work in. Working in from a Victorian state perspective, the protocols that they're going to be living in are extreme. What you see on TV over in England. There's multiple millions of dollars to keep those players separated from the community. I was reading this morning about Steve Smith coming into UAE and essentially having to be in a hazmat suit. That's not happening in community cricket, and obviously reasonably so. So there's protocols for high performance and there's protocols for the community. And the main thing that'll be sort of that difference is what you can see at the community level or at the elite level is that they are essentially COVID protected. They're tested regularly. So them coming in and high fives or being in huddles and all those sort of things, similar to AFL players who can tackle and all those sort of things as well. That's different to community because we're not living in those same sort of protocols. So that's going to be an important message to get across to players, parents, that what they see on TV is different to community cricket, and that's a sort of a key thing as well. So we worked through then from a community perspective what was required at a community level, and this was months ago when it first kicked off. Those protocols were signed off by the state government, as all state sporting associations needed to do. We were then able to release the first set of protocols that we had up on our website months ago. As each step and as each stage, and as it was termed from the state government, we were going into the stage 1 lockdown or stage 2 or stage 3 or stage 4. As each one of those progressed and more information came out, we continued to update that documentation. What we've done now is we've turned it into a COVID-19 plan based on the current guidelines that are required. There was certainly more and more evidence that the clubs and associations would need their own plan. So we've done, again, that hard work to develop it into to a plan. So some of the resources that we've worked through at all the different parts has been in terms of the DHHS website, Sport and Rec Victoria, Cricket Australia's protocols that they have on their website and their return to cricket. So we've looked at all of that information that's out there to try and bring it back into the consolidated document. The document we've been working on, and this is probably one of the critical things that we want to get across today. It's version 1 of the plan. We've actually been working on this version. We did a lot of work on it last Saturday for hours, and every day since there's been more information that's come up and it's continued to change. We've released it to allow clubs to have their own plan. But the reality is, as we know, the state government will continue to make additional rulings. The trend we're in, hopefully it's less restrictions than more. So we sort of feel that at the moment, we're fingers crossed that it's going to be the most restrictive that it will be throughout the summer. And as each day and week passes, there may be more and more restrictions that come off or more relaxing of things that need to be done. And we'll be able to get to a little bit more of normality of what we see at cricket. But certainly there'll be some key differences that are in the documentation at the moment. We will continue to advocate on behalf of community cricket. Everyone on this call loves cricket and wants cricket to go ahead. We've all been locked down for months. Those that were connected to winter sports haven't been able to connect to those winter sports. We know the value of cricket in terms of the social connection, obviously the physical health, the mental health benefits. We know all of those things and we want to get it back. What we do have though is we are still living in a pandemic. Our message is that the cricket in a pandemic is a privilege, not a right. We need to make sure that we're adhering to the state government health protocols. And we will touch on what some of those look like. And certainly there has been community cricket being played over in England. So it's definitely not impossible. There's just a few tweaks and there's a few things that the clubs need to be aware of in training and in match day as well. So the game itself will broadly look the same, but it's just a few areas that we need to really highlight. So we've continued to work through the documentation. A key one that came out on the 17th, so just on Thursday afternoon, was from Sport and Rec Victoria, where we had. So this is the advice that we receive, and this is where we've gained a lot of the most recent information. Here's one that we will touch on, and that's going to be a big one at the moment for adults. So cricket is, and for those that have read the documentation, cricket is a non-contact sport. There are some traditional non-contact sports from a COVID perspective are considered contact, because in cricket you're often and mostly 1.5 metres away from others whilst playing. A lot of other sports, be it netball or soccer or others that are non-contact, you can't actually maintain that distance. You're regularly within that close proximity to others. So for adults, and again, this is where a lot of the information that we've just received. Just a reminder for anyone that's listening, if you can stay on mute, just to allow everyone to be able to hear nice and clearly, that'd be great. So community sport for adults can resume based on the number of players people required to play, plus necessary coaches and umpires. We'll come back to this. We actually extend this slightly by scorers, and it says later that canteens can be open. But there's no spectators at the moment for seniors. We understand that we play on community parks. Again, this is not a Cricket Victoria ruling. This is Sport and Rec Vic, and they're open parks and people can walk their dog and all those sorts of things. But the reality is at the moment, that's what it says. This could be one that continues to change and evolve over time. So by the time we actually hit round 1, that may have been changed. But this is the awareness and this is the advice that we need to provide because it's current. From a underage perspective, so competitions that are underage, this is where it says that, again, it's a number of players, but spectators are allowed if they're super. So as we know, parents are mostly those that attend junior games. So if they're there looking after their children and supporting people with other needs, as long as they're in groups of, it says not less than 10, we're pretty sure that's a typo, but gathering limits of no more than 10 people. So spectators, parents are allowed, no more than groups of 10, maintaining their social distance, and normal numbers can take place. So if it's stage 1 or stage 2 or whatever the rules, or even for seniors, if you've got 11 or 13 aside, that's fine as well.
Paul, I'll just quickly jump in. Sorry, we just had a question that probably relates to what we're talking about. And it comes from Kylie McMillan asking who is responsible for keeping spectators away. And then a follow-up question from Craig is, how is this being policed?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's going to be difficult, absolutely. And the more that clubs can do to try and minimise that, to try and articulate to those that are in the community, sorry, spectators are not allowed. This has just come up yesterday, so we might even be able to provide a bit of a poster template that people can put up. The more that clubs can do, the better, because we know that people from the community, we've seen it, even at Cricket Victoria, had a closed training session in our high performance protocols, but the police were called. Someone walked past and saw someone training, so the police come down just to check what the protocols were. So if clubs are trying to keep people away, to comply with the protocols, if someone dobs the club in, and we've definitely seen that. It's been happening for months that people have rung the hotline from the community because they can't do certain things. This is where the clubs just need to be as vigilant as they can. And because the police or the council may be called, and at least if the club can say, well, this is what we've tried to do. Obviously, if the club is minimising its own people, and it's just those that are playing, certainly those that are around can say, look, sorry, there's no spectators, asking them to move on. But as I said, this has just come out in the last 24 hours, so we'll try and provide some signage and further advice.
There's just a couple of quick follow-ups to that. So Lisa Armstrong's written, what about parents who have under 18s playing senior cricket? And then a follow-up to that is, if kids are playing seniors, are they considered adult, or are parents allowed to be spectators in that capacity?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. That's one we'll continue to follow up at the moment. So again, games won't be taking place this weekend or the next weekend. So we've got a little bit of time in terms of following this one up. All we've got is at the moment the outdoor cricket for adults can start, and there's no spectators. So arguably, if you've got an outdoor game for spectators or an outdoor game of cricket for adults, there's no spectators there. But again, we'll continue to get guidance from Sport and Rec Victoria, the Department of Health and Human Services, ascertain to see if we can actually have clarity in relation to if children are playing in adults games, they can be spectators. But again, that's just going to be an awareness of the rulings that we have. Erring on the side of caution at the moment. It's about saying there's no spectators are allowed for any adult games. But as information continues to come to light, as I said, Darren and I were working on this every day, and there was more things that came up every day. So we'll continue to work through those protocols.
There's another couple of ones which I can answer off on. It says, isn't it contradictory advice that clubs can open for meals and drinks under this restriction, but then also mums and wives arriving for afternoon tea, is this allowed? What the ruling is that communal afternoon teas are not allowed. So the players need to bring their own food, pre-packaged and sealed for matches. So there's no afternoon tea as we've seen it previously. Players from each teams will have to bring their own food. So there won't be mums and wives arriving with the afternoon tea. And then with regards to the meals and drinks, this is in regards to regulations, and we've got a link in there. You need to follow the advice for the hospitality industry around what is allowed to take place. What we're suggesting is that it all needs to be takeaway, and with outdoor, so people are eating outdoors, so people will not be able to eat indoors unless the hospitality advice around distancing and capacity is adhered to.
So as you'll see from this, and we'll go through this plan now, and a lot of these questions are answered through this plan about training and match day. There is some complexity. Sport does look different this summer, and again, we have to get all the clubs on side with that. There'll be things that at the moment are clearly not things that we would like to see occur. But again, this is a pandemic. This is health guidelines that are out there. We want to see cricket happen, and it will look a little bit different. Hopefully, this is the only summer where it will look different, but there will be some challenges ahead. So what we have, as I just walked through before, on the Cricket Victoria website, on this first part that we have, return to train and play, this download. What I will do before we get into it, so this is the part that I showed before with support, clubs and associations. There's a range of information here, latest news, details on the releases, More COVID guidelines are here, links to where you can buy signage and sanitizer as well, plus some free downloadable posters. So there's a range of resources that are on our support website. We'd also encourage you to look at the grant and funding side as well, and further resources that are out there. But again, just sort of taking it back to the homepage where you can download your own plan, and we'll walk through this plan now. So you can actually go in there and type in the name of your club at the start, and there's other parts where you can put in the name of your club as well. This is an important one. This is critical here. Version 1 as of yesterday. We'll continue. We would expect to have a version 2 inside a fortnight. And we'll also talk about, we would suggest to endorse this now, but once the version 2 comes out, and it's a 2 or 3 minute process, is to then put the names back on, because that'll have the latest advice. We know that Melbourne, hopefully, and based on the numbers, will move out of the current restrictions into that step 2, and there'll be therefore further advice for Melbourne as well. But this is a 25-page plan, but what we'll show is the things that will be living and breathing on a regular basis once you get into training and match day. But certainly what we'll do is talk you through this plan, because it does talk about every element of all the training and match day, etc., etc. So this has got some guide as to how to use the plan on the inside cover. Calls out the pages to edit, which is just putting your name at the top of it to personalise it, and have the club formally endorse the plan at the next available opportunity. The critical part to that is to then live and breathe the document. Make sure everyone's across it and aware of the plan. Put it on your website. Local council is going to be critical. They're going to need to see your club's plan. If you've already got a plan, fantastic. Share it with the council. If you want to use our template, great, because the heavy work's been done. But share it widely. Let people know about your plan. Promote it as widely as you can. Then there's a couple of pages that we say to print out, laminate, and display. So there's a 1-page training plan, a match day poster, and then we'll talk about the attendance register as well, which is a critical part as well. So we've got a lot to cover before 11 o'clock, and we will try and sort of go through it as each of the sections in there to give you a guide. But there's some sections we'll touch on in a little bit more detail.
Just a quick one. So someone's asked the question, if we don't have spectators, we may not have scorers. What should or could we do about that? I think that one might be a bit of an easy one. So the fact that the scorer can actually become a spectator, you might actually have more people putting their hand up to do the scoring, because that way they can be at the games. But it's just something about communicating with your members and people being there. So scorers are allowed. And if you communicate that scorers are allowed, well, then you might have more people put up their hand wanting to score.
Yeah, and I know it's at my local club, when I was team manager down there, we would have a roster. Us of a parents, it was a junior team, and a roster, and it needed to sort of be pretty well organised. You need to be there, and yes, we understand sometimes not everyone's reliable, but if they're designated, and we've called out, whilst it wasn't called out in the SRB, scorers as a critical part to it as well. Now, we also understand, so some might have an electronic scoreboard and those sort of things. It's not trying, we don't want clubs to try and get around the rules. It's about trying to comply as best we can, but we also understand that the game needs to happen. So it's the absolute minimum that are required for that game to go ahead.
Just Paul, quickly, we've had a request to see if we can just zoom in a little bit for a bit more clarity with what's written is for that. There we go.
Perfect. Great call. And again, after this webinar is finished, encourage you to go to the website and download it yourself and zoom in, print it out as well. Don't worry too much about this one here. This will be where we have, when we go from version 1 to 2, we'll call out key changes. So this will be, rather than having to read every word of every page, when we have version 2, it'll say there's been the following changes since version 1 to version 2. We've called out what we changed from the previous one that was on there. So anyone that had the document from August 2 to September 13, these are some of the core changes that we've made to this doc. This is sort of a key page we'll touch on. Again, this is about regional Victoria. From a metropolitan perspective, we know that's still in step 1. So really sort of calling out, this is current guidance. It's a guidance in line with the documentation that we have from Sport and Rec Victoria, and it's based on where we're at. But continue to monitor advice as it comes up, because we'll be starting to work on version 2 of this from Monday, because we're no doubt that there'll be some other elements there. So indoor training is banned. Outdoor training permitted in groups of no more than 10, and we'll touch on where coaches can be outside of that 10. So what that means, and there's no definitive guides as to the spacing between groups, but speaking to the state government, so this is sort of verbal conversations we've had for those that want to actually start training. If you've got a ground, single ground and nets, you could have 3 groups of 10 training at once. One group in the nets, one on half the ground, and another on half the ground. You could rotate the groups through so they all get a net session, but don't mix between the groups. The reason for that is, whilst they could be in groups of 10, but if you keep mixing, if someone actually gets COVID from that group, the potential of the Department of Health and Human Services closing down everyone from that group might need to isolate for 14 days if someone's actually got COVID. So whilst technically the group sizes would be 10, if you've got 5 in that group and they just come up and 2 bat and they go back to the fielding group and they just keep rotating through 30 people that are spaced out, potentially all 30 need to isolate. So what we're saying with a net group of 10, you could have 5 in net 1 and 5 in a far net. So you've actually got a bit of spacing between them as well. So you haven't got potentially of 8 bowlers all congregating as well. You're trying to sort of keep that out. That doesn't mean that you can't have 5 in net 1 and 5 in net 2. Absolutely can, because they're in their group of 10. We're just trying to actually minimise the chance of the virus being spread here as well. So groups of 10, and if you've got 2 grounds with a net, you could have actually 5 groups all going at once. 2 groups on 1 ground, and then 1 in the nets as well.
Paul, we've just had a question from Chris asking if the group should stay the same for each training session throughout the year.
Potentially during the year would be fantastic, but absolutely at least for a week, ideally for a fortnight, because again, the reason for that is if again someone gets COVID and you keep mixing the groups between a Tuesday and a Thursday, then obviously they're playing in a team on a Saturday and they're mixing again with others on a Tuesday. If it'll be the Department of Health and Human Services that decide who else are close contacts. We had an example of another sport over winter that actually had really good processes of recording who was in the group. We were able to produce that to the Department of Health and Human Services. They were actually in groups of 5, and therefore it was only that group of 5. The rest of the club could continue. And so if these are sort of, that's best practice, is to keep that same group and not mixing that through training, absolutely. But the actual technical rules are, as long as you're in a group of no more than 10, that's fine. Really good idea, though, and I think it was Chris that had that. But if you keep the group sizes in groups the same, that's going to enable you to say during the course of that week, that group was isolated from anyone else they didn't mix. So that'll allow less people to have to isolate. We haven't got specific ruling yet, and we're waiting on it for turf wicket preparation, but clearly we're saying, well, it needs to happen because matches can happen from technically from October in regional areas. So, well, technically they can happen from now, but as we know, outdoor training and outdoor matches can start. So what we've said is check with your council, saying this 3 times here. Don't just go out and start for those that are working on it. Subject to the normal protocols, we're encouraging it, but again, it's up to councils there.
Paul, we've had a question saying, hi guys, we've got about 6 to 8 guys helping prepare turf on a Saturday morning. Are we meant to do our task and then just leave?
Yes, yeah, it's a matter of get in, get out. That's a sort of the message we've got for training. The message we've got for playing is that'd be, again, a point to raise to the council as well, to say we need to come down, we want to start preparing the wicket. This is how we're going to do it. Everyone's going to be socially distant. We're going to wipe down touch points before we touch them. We'll have masks on. We'll do work on the wicket, and then we'll go. Then we'll leave. So if obviously there's training that can happen as well. So those that are doing it outside of training, if they want to join in for training, not a problem at all. But from our point of view, you just need to run it by council to say that we want to be preparing the wickets, and every council will be slightly different in that space.
We've just had a quick question. Is a COVID officer required at each game, match and training session?
Yeah, and we'll touch on that in the next slide. A good question. This is what we touched about with team numbers. So whatever the team number rules are is fine. We've spoken about the spectators. And so what we've got here for seniors is players, coaches, umpires, scorers, COVID officer, and anyone operating the canteen. Now, the challenge with operating the canteen, we appreciate, is that there's no spectators. But canteens can be open based on the state government advice. So certainly there's someone to operate the canteen, someone to operate the scoring system. Again, if you need someone to operate the scoreboard, well, that could be deemed as that. But don't try and push the envelope about, we need someone to open up, and we need someone to do the cleaning, and we've got, someone else that's because that's where I guess the members of the community will say, hold on, I saw 20 people at that game. Isn't there supposed to be no spectators? And that's just where that you could obviously come into trouble. From a facility perspective, toilets obviously need to be opened, cleaned regularly, and there's more details through the plan about that. Communal change rooms may be opened, so it's absolutely up to the club. Our suggestion is to not open those change rooms to further help reduce the spread of COVID-19 and to minimise cleaning time and cost, because there's obviously going to be significant more protocols to clean all of those areas. We do have guidance there for those that are opening. There's density limits. There's a page at the back of the plan about how to work out your density limit, and you can put a sign up to say this room can have 5 people or 10 people or 15 people. Particularly those in regional areas, you'll start seeing those at in cafes and restaurants as you start moving your way around. There's canteens, kiosk, and at venue dining may be opened. But again, if you sort of work through some of the guidance there, and we've got links through the document about these here to actually enable working out the density as well. This is a big one. This came up in the last 24 hours or so, is that we've seen advice through to the schools that schools should remain closed for community groups. That's advice from the Education Department to schools. We know the significance of that. We've already gone back to the Department of Education and Training to work with the Department of Health and Human Services to see if that can be relaxed. Inter-school sport is called off for term 4. So that's the current ruling that's in place at the moment, and again, that's the reality of what we need to work through. So certainly, that's an area where we need to be conscious of. Speak to your local school. This is an area where, if that is going to be the case, and it is at the moment, and if it's still for the unforeseen foreseeable future, there will need to be some flexible thinking from associations in relation to fixturing. Can we sort of use more weeks or more nights of the week? Can we minimise trainings and just to maximise the number of matches that are played? But certainly at the moment, the advice from the Education Department to schools is to close them for user groups. Travel, so Melbourne metropolitan residents may not travel to regional Victoria for cricket. We know in the reverse, regional Victoria can't travel to Melbourne because there's no matches that can be played in matches and training that can be played in Melbourne as well. Those that live in the border towns would probably be aware of the easing restrictions from the New South Wales government that allow almost it's 100 kilometres, but 50 kilometres either side of the border to travel across the border. So there's a permit that you require for border towns to be able to move across the New South Wales border. For anyone dialing in on the SA border, we'll deal with that through the North and West area staff directly with your club. But certainly the guidance has been provided for that permit at New South Wales. So there's certainly some big things to take away. As I said, we'll continue to be guided by the state government. We'll continue to ask questions about, for example, the question about parents of underage players playing seniors. We'll continue to advocate about school grounds, and there's another big one that we think we're starting to have a bit of a win at, but at the moment we've got some challenges with sharing of equipment, but we'll come back to that through the rest of the session. So,
Paul, sorry, we've just had a quick one come through. Can a paid coach living in Melbourne travel to country Victoria to train and play?
It's a really good question. We would say at the moment, no. But again, we'll get guidance on that. Certainly, if that is allowed, because it's their work, then yeah, we'll seek to make that that argument, and then it's an element of ascertaining what permits they might need to travel to go across the iron wall, as they're calling it. So this here is a commitment statement. So again, putting the name of the club. We as a club are fully supportive. We play an important role. These are the things that that we'll commit to. Again, where you see this blue text, there's links to different elements that you can click through to find more information. So this is another key one that we want everyone to be conscious of. Really critical to have someone at the club. Doesn't have to be the president, secretary, treasurer. Can be just someone that takes on a bit of that responsibility. For those volunteers, it's the same with doing an inspection of the ground. Volunteers acting in good faith are protected by legislation. The insurance remains. There's no exclusion for COVID. So this is similar to safeguarding children, similar to uncovering potholes on the ground. The more that clubs do to try and minimise the risk, the better. So anyone that sort of is concerned about putting their hand up as a COVID officer, it's a volunteer. You're protected by volunteer legislation. There's insurance in place, all those things there. If a club doesn't do anything, it says we're not going to appoint a COVID officer. No one wants to take on that risk. We're not adopting this plan because we're not sure we can comply with it. That's when there's going to be more problems, because if something does happen and the department sort of check it out, or even just members of the community, if someone actually contracts the virus, they'll be sort of saying to the club, what did you guys do to try and prevent this virus? So certainly encourage. What we're saying is that for at least one person to take the lead at the club, but also to have a representative from each team. So as I said before, you really need someone who's thinking from a COVID perspective at each of those games. So it could be anyone, coach, captain, team manager, who's often obviously a parent for juniors, or scorer, but they're coming along to be the support rep. They can be the eyes and ears on match day as well, back to the person at the club. But you really need, it's a whole club responsibility, but multiple people taking on that role. These are the core things that we sort of say. There's some free online training, which is more about COVID-19 in general, but then you'll actually get a certificate which you can send through to your association to say, here is our COVID officer. That'll be a help for the associations of making sure they communicate any COVID updates to the right person as well. Familiarise yourself with the latest document that we've got here. Read through this plan. Search through the different sites if you need to, and there's click-throughs here. This is one that we sort of showed before, is Return to Cricket, which has some products that you can access, which is the range of signage. Again, there's some free downloadable ones, but there's some range of signage, range of sanitizer and wipes, etc., etc. So that's, again, a click through from this Return to Cricket site. There's other resources that you can familiarise yourself with as well, but it's talk to the council. We're sort of saying that indoor facilities are closed now anyway, but if you did down the track, want to make sure you're talking to your centre manager, work with your council, who's paying for cleaning, how's it working? It's just asking questions of the authorities you deal with. Can the rooms be open? But even should they be open as a club? Again, there's no spectators for seniors. The idea of get in, train, get out, get in, play, get out. But if you do want to open them, These are the click-throughs to find out more information about how many people can be in the rooms, and signage at the back of the this plan as well. How do we comply with liquor licensing? Is there an element of a temporary license variation if you're looking to have outdoor consumption? Talking to that again, we know that that spectators aren't allowed. Hopefully that can be changed soon. But if you've already done your work here to allow some outdoor consumption, that minimises the chances of actually needing to have your rooms open as well. So ample signage up, links there for free, downloadable signage, ensuring that it's adhered to. So keeping an eye over those that are congregating 1.5 away, making sure the sanitizer's out, making sure the groups are at no more than 10. Just keeping an eye out, because again, this is about trying to stop the spread, but also about adhering to the protocols should the club be dobbed in for not adhering to the protocols. And then making sure it's promoted widely to everyone. So again, yep.
Sorry, we just had one. What would be the ruling if a player lives in regional Victoria, works in Melbourne? Can they train and play in regional Victoria? So the answer to that would be yes, because they will have a permit to travel up into Melbourne to work, but obviously they can then return home and train and play in regional Victoria. It's slightly different and would need to be worked through by the player if they were to live in metropolitan Melbourne and then want to go back out and travel.
Yeah, that's right, because they've got permission to travel for work. But that's where that example of someone in Melbourne as a coach, that's their job, and if that's their paid employment to go to regional, it's a good question, and Darren and I will check that out. So the next few pages is some general information about training. There's a fair bit here, and we've already sort of covered that about the groups. They can rotate, but don't mix. So you've got half on one oval, half on the other, half in the nets. After half an hour, they move around, but don't mix. They get in, ready to train. That group stays together, move across, stays, gets in the car and goes. So you've got the training, but you're not mixing. You're not. You're adhering to the groups of 10. Keeping the social distance. So again, won't touch on all of these because there's a bit to cover in the rest of the session, but there's a bit of info here. We've got some hygiene protocols. Again, we've spoken about the no high fives because they're not living like you see on TV. They're not living in a bubble. These are just members of the general community. We're saying that change rooms, they're discouraged for training. So players arrive in their gear and ready to go. Have hand sanitizer ready, and we'll touch on the match protocols. Today's really going to be as much about training, because match protocols, you can digest those throughout the course of the next couple of weeks, because we know matches won't be started. But really starting to think about this training part of the document as to how this can work.
And as we've mentioned in the chat, we're going to have a frequently asked questions section up on the Cricket Victoria website, which will cover off on a lot of things that are being asked, because we've got a number of these sessions still to come. However, one good question that came through with regards to training, Paul, was the role of the coach and whether or not they can then rotate with the groups, or whether or not they have to stick with one group.
Yeah, it's a good question. And if they're maintaining a distance, they could monitor each of those groups. But it's really about them not coming in and being part of that group. If they're standing 10 metres away from a group and monitoring that group of 10 in the nets, or they're monitoring the fielding drill, they could be monitoring their net session the entire time. But if they're actually standing 10 or 15 metres away, they can come in and address the players for, and if they're staying a little bit away, but it's making sure the groups are still 1.5 away and a coach is monitoring that. So they can monitor all three, but at a distance, because we want to make sure that they're protected from that group of 10.
And on top of that, the next question that came through was how many people are allowed to help at junior training?
Yeah, look, it's really trying to minimise that to the number. And again, we sort of know often it's just going to be the coach and maybe a team manager or another parent that hangs around at a junior training. And we'll touch on the check-in codes. And again, we've got a bit to cover in the next 15 minutes. But what we're really suggesting is that parents come in, they check in. We've got a QR code for them to do. It takes them 20 seconds to check into the session. and then would actually probably prefer they leave. So the minimum number required, so which might be a coach and assistant coach, or a coach and a regular helper for a training session. So minimise the number of people that are required for training.
And a question came through from Dinesh, which I can answer. Have the guidelines around ball management been relaxed in terms of allocating dedicated cricket balls during training sessions and then letting them be unused for 3 days post-usage? What we're highlighting in the document is that the balls need to be cleaned. Ideally, the players would have their own ball and use their own ball throughout the season, but we do know that there's a fair cost to that. So if they are shared cricket balls for a training session or a fielding drill sort of thing, they need to be cleaned pre and post. Ideally, they'd be let to sit unused for a few days. But it's just common sense in ensuring the safety and hygiene protocols as outlined in the document.
The reality is that you could get through an entire season and try and cut corners and there's no COVID cost. But our suggestion is the more that you can do, the more chances someone actually won't get the virus. That's the main thing we're looking to do, is to ensure that someone doesn't get the virus. So if they are actually cleaning the balls regularly, that's great. Really conscious that we've only got a bit over 10 minutes before we've got, so we'll try and just work through this document as well. The questions that we've got coming through, as Darren said, we'll certainly try and answer the frequently asked questions, but to make sure we try and get through the rest of the document, I'll work through these pretty quickly. But what we've got is before the session, again, there's a checkbox there. These are the key things to have the signs up. The posters we'll touch on in a second. Make sure the training equipment, including the balls, as Darren said, has been cleaned. We would say keep them closed, because the more that it's opened, the more that you need to clean, because all those areas could have been touched. All the door handles inside, the tables, the chairs, etc. Saying every second net, again, you're minimising the close contact between people. You've only got groups of 10 in the nets anyway, so have that second net as a throwdown, and then have use net 1 and 3. And if you needed for a throwdown, you could have net 2. Have the sanitizer and wipes on hand. This talks about during the session. And again, there's a lot of information to take in this morning, so read the document afterwards as well. But have sanitizer, have a break every half an hour or so to re-sanitize. Don't mix, as we've said, no spitting, etc. Come ready to go. Masks. So mostly, obviously, it's players that are training. If you're batting, bowling, and fielding, you don't need a mask. If you're 12 and under, you don't need a mask. But for a coach that's standing around watching, they're not exerting physical energy. They're not running around, so they need to wear their mask. And to adhere to the signage. And then it's about checking out, wiping down, and storing anything. The next 2 pages, again, this is a message that we continue to have. That's a key theme to put across to the club. We're in a pandemic. It's a privilege, not a right, to play cricket, so get in, train, get out. This has more information about the page that we just worked through, and a range of almost frequently asked questions that Darren spoke about. We've got guidance if you do need to open, how to do that safely. If there's a confirmed case, what to do. So there's a range of guidance there to help you. We'll touch briefly on the playing, again, because we don't want to bog down too much on playing. It's more about the training stuff, but to get through to the end. A big one that we want to highlight right at the moment, but we're still seeking to provide and get more guidance from the authorities, is about no sharing of equipment. Only touch your own gear, so do not touch anyone else's equipment. So at the moment, that is helmets, bats, gloves, etc., etc. That's coming from Cricket Australia. Their medical advice is do not share. We're working hard in the background, and we think there's a little bit of conflicting advice, which is we're optimistic, but we may be in a position to be able to share and announce that soon. But sharing, you just need to have those cleaned beforehand. Again, we know that's not ideal. Normally a helmet is just taken off and someone else puts on the helmet, or they hand over a bat and away they go. Things will take longer this year as a result of some of the protocols. We speak about this, keep an open mind. Spoke about it's going to look different to what's on TV, and it may take more time and effort than normal. So we may get to a stage, for example, that a helmet needs to be wiped and the grill needs to be wiped before it's handed to the next person for use. At the moment, the Cricket Australia advice is that it's not shared. So that's the wording we've got in our documentation. We're hopeful in the next week or two we can get some clear advice from the state government about this. And again, that's where version 2 might say not to, or this is how to share equipment safely. So the other key aspects of match day is ensuring that every 10 overs, there's a break to wipe the ball and also for players and umpires to sanitise their hands. Another difference is that umpires don't take the bowler's cap. That's to be left, and there's more detail within the next 2 pages. So this is a 1-pager that goes up as a bit of a reminder. This is the match day protocols that each of the bodies, the VCCL, VMCU subbies, have all fully endorsed, and it's a requirement for everyone to implement. The associations need to do that themselves as part. They manage their regulations, but certainly fully endorsed to comply with the guidelines set out by Cricket Australia, but also the state government protocols as well. So there are some on Cricket Australia, but these here are the ones that you need to look at because there are some differences from a Victorian perspective. We call out masks, we call out DHHS guidelines. So there's elements that we speak to. This is where, again, we're hopeful we can make some changes to this, but this is saying no personal equipment should be shared. Hopefully in the version 2, it talks about equipment can be shared, but these are the cleaning protocols that are required. So the suggestion is to, again, for players to keep their kit bags outside, might be in the car, in the shade, but to not use the rooms because we know some of the rooms are really small and they need to sort of maintain that distance throughout as well. Another one here, you can read through the detail, but what we've sort of said, so an umpire doesn't take the cap, so a bowler themselves puts it at the nearest of either over the boundary, behind the keeper, or behind the umpire at the bowler's end. That could be at the top of the mark, and we're also juniors that almost try and dig a trench 4 foot deep to mark their run-up. So maybe they just put their cap down, and that's their mark and then they pick it up at the end of the over. There will be guidance about, and there's a separate resource for associations about what happens if there's sweat and saliva put on the ball. But essentially, it's a difference between accidental and intentional as to what the sort of penalties would be. But broadly speaking, there can be a penalty of 5 runs for intentional. We also appreciate that a lot of games are umpired by players, but that's just an awareness piece as well. That's the sort of the ruling. No communal food and drink, as Darren said, because that's again the extra risks of sharing shared food and drink just adds to the potential spread of COVID. So it's essentially BYO, or if there's a for those from the canteen, but yeah, bringing it yourself. Having the sanitizer there. There's guidance here about team sheets and scoring. We know that scorers might rotate between players throughout the day, but just have some wipes on hand to wipe down the pens or an iPad between use. Don't the old traditional green team sheet in the back of the scorebook. We're saying, don't hand that around. Again, that's just one extra little element to work through. Ideally, put it on My Cricket, or if you fill it into the back of the book, just take a photo of the opposition. The opposition can take a photo, so they've got that there.
Paul, one that has come through a fair bit is the carpooling question. Obviously, really pertinent to the regional areas of Victoria.
Great. So the advice that we've got, and it's embedded into this document as well, the state government are saying, I don't think I've got the exact wording of the link, but essentially it's to be avoided where possible. Members of the same household are fine, but they give a guidance about sharing a car for lengthy distances, but it doesn't say it is banned. It does say it's avoid where possible. So we're certainly encouraging it. One of the things we're doing with Premier Cricket, for example, and there's a bit of a guidance about the fixturing part, but Premier Cricket in the last couple of days, we've announced won't start until the 21st of November. Obviously, mostly a Melbourne-based competition, plus Geelong. The first 5 rounds of those, so taking up to Christmas, are against the nearest rivals. So every team will play each other once across 17 rounds, but the first 5 rounds are to try and avoid A travel from Frankston and Casey to Geelong or to Greenvale. And so again, we would suggest minimising the distance of away trips in the early part of the season. That ruling may be relaxed even further by the state government. It does say that it's possible. So if someone doesn't have a car and they can't get there, but you may be stopped along the way and you may be asked to justify. It does say that it should be avoided. So it's going to be an increased risk of multiple people from different households sharing a car. So that's just an awareness that that's a state government ruling. It's not banned, but it's saying avoid where possible.
Yeah, and one of the questions come through, wipes are extremely expensive. Where do we look for guidance for an alternate disinfectant spray, e.g. Pino Clean diluted in water, as this has been used in schools? Well, with regards to the wipes, this is what is required, an alcohol-based wipe with a minimum content of 70% alcohol for cleaning the ball. So there won't be alternate advice with regards to Pino Clean and water. That's the requirement, and they can be purchased, as Paul said, through either the Return to Cricket website, but you can also buy alcohol-based wipes at Chemist Warehouse and that sort of thing. So I know it was called out as microbial wipes previously. They are very tough to find, even when you Google them. So we did a bit of research and found out that it's just basically an alcohol-based wipe with a minimum content of 70% alcohol to be used when cleaning the ball.
We're also conscious that, or just in the last less than 24 hours, so late yesterday afternoon, talking to Cricket Australia, there may be another provider out there that can provide some solutions as well. But as Darren said, it's just looking at that alcohol-based, so ethanol-based antibacterial wipe at 70%, and that's what's required. The alcohol nature of it will add to the cleaning protocols, but also won't leave a sticky residue on the ball as well. So that's one of the other benefits. And again, that's been sort of tested through the ball supply. So there's a lot of stuff, a lot of work that goes into the background to some of the rationale. But this is what's required. It's again to try and help. If there is someone that is diagnosed with COVID, DHHS will need to know who was at the facility. We've developed a really simple, it'll end up looking like this, but a check-in, check-out. So someone would scan that, and it would take about 25 seconds to fill out the details of name, phone number. Do you have any symptoms? That's the potential of clubs could also adjust their ground locations as well. So we've got clear guidance. You click on this link, duplicate the form, and you can actually personalise that as well. And you'll end up being able to develop your own here. So you can put your logos on the side and a QR code here. And then what we ask at training and matches. So for matches, we're saying it's the home club hosts it because it's about the venue, not about individual teams. So if there's a request of who was at the QEO on this particular day, then the away team and the home team would actually scan the same check-in. And again, for the club, they'll then end up, if they set this up, they'll have that information. If they're asked by the department, they'll be able to provide it. That'll speed up the contact tracing. What we then have is some further guidance and protocols. Conscious that we're getting to the end of the session, but there is a range of extra resources here. Guidance for canteens. Canteen, the advice from Food Standards Australia is that it's not about wearing gloves, because it's a false sense of security. It's about regular hygiene, regular hand washing as well with soap and water for those that are serving behind the canteen. But again, for spectators, for juniors, and being aware of what the current ruling is, hopefully that gets revised for seniors soon. But at the moment, that's what it is. Making sure they sign in via the QR code as well. It's a range of more information. We know there's going to be extra challenges with Woolworths Cricket Blast. There's links there to provide the guidance about Woolworths Cricket Blast, because they could have dozens and dozens, if not more than 100 at a session, and that's going to be challenging in groups of 10. But continue to stay abreast of what the advice is. At the moment, it's groups of 10. We're seeking to see whether or not, because of the ages of the children, again, they can be in, we know there's differences at schools. We don't make the rules for schools. So obviously, we just need to be guided by what's appropriate at the community level as well. We talk about, this is the links about the latest advice from DHHS. continue to keep aware of that. We're really conscious that's a significant one with regional Victorias as well. But and this is for a density. There's a link there, again, to work out how many can be inside the rooms, but it comes down to the 1 per 4 square metres for internal areas. So you can measure up the rooms, insert the number here, and put this poster up so to confirm the maximum number of people in the rooms at any one time. And a range of links. There's all click-throughs here for all different resources that you might need at different stages. WorkSafe, again, for a canteen and those that have got meals, etc., etc. So there's a significant amount there. Really conscious that there's a lot to take in. We will continue to advocate and fight for normality of cricket. But I would suspect for the entirety of the season, it won't look normal. There will be differences to a normal season. Hopefully some of these restrictions can be relaxed in days and weeks, and we'll continue to update it. But our advice is to make sure that you've got engagement from the council, make sure the players are, before you start training, and some may be earmarking this weekend, talk to your players, talk to your coaches. Have a bit of a chat before the first session, reminding them about the groups attend, reminding them about not mixing, because if those protocols are breached, the club could be dobbed in, but also the fact that the virus might spread. We know in regional areas, and I was just looking this morning, and outside of Colac and Latrobe, there's less than 10 in the entirety of Victoria, so there might be an element of we're fine in regional Victoria. But we also, have seen other parts of the world where it's increased after it was improving as well. So we just need to keep vigilant. We want cricket to play all season, but there's going to be some changes. Let's be as vigilant as we can. Keep up to date with the websites. We will keep updating through our networks and through the VCCL. We'll have a new document, I would expect, within a fortnight. But again, endorse this plan now, use it. Once a new plan comes out, put your details on the new plan, and it will look 99% the same, but we'll call out the changes in that earlier pages to what the new protocols will be.
We've just had one last one come in saying, based on what they see, there's no reason why multiple games can't be played at the same venue on one day, i.e. one in the morning, one in the afternoon, provided the facilities are cleaned.
Correct.
Yep, 100%.
Correct, that's right. So really good question, and obviously that's relevant for juniors and seniors, obviously. And but just keep the protocols up, because the key thing you're trying to do is to keep people safe and also comply with the rules. So again, if you don't have change rooms open, that's a hell of a lot easier to only clean. It might be the scorer's table and the toilets. That's all you need to clean to keep it going. As it continues to move through the stages, if regional Victoria then gets to a stage where it moves to the final step, there'll be a lot more relaxing of protocols as well, and we can have a lot more normality. But look, we're here to help. Speak to the regional staff, whether it be the north and west guys, the southwest or the southeast. If you've got any questions, ask them. Keep abreast of the information. Sorry, Darren, there's another question.
Yeah, no, sorry. I was just going to throw in, communication is key. We'll do our best to communicate as much as possible and as regularly as possible with the associations and clubs via our club and association newsletters, and potentially offering more webinars along the way. But also, from your point of view as clubs and associations, make sure you have your pre-season meetings with your players and your parents, whether it's via video meeting. That's probably the best format, so everyone's on the same page, knowing that as lucky as we are to be able to return to cricket, it can just as easily be taken away if we don't follow the right protocols and procedures. So we all need to be working on this together and doing the right thing so that we can play a full season of cricket and enjoy a summer of sport.
So really appreciate everyone dialing in today. We're all in this together, and we are from a cricket perspective as well. We're here to help. If we can provide some extra clarity, yell out. We'll advocate, as we have done with equipment sharing. We have done in relation to use of schools, all those sort of things we're looking to work on. So really appreciate you giving up your time. enjoy the rest of what is the first weekend of school holidays for most, and good weather and being able to get out and about. Hopefully get a chance to see some friends that you haven't seen for a little while as well. But good luck for the start of the training season. And just make sure, yeah, as Darren said, to keep everyone on the same page. We want to do the right thing so we can get as much cricket played as possible. But really appreciate your time. Good luck, and keep the communication up. Thank
Thanks
you.
all.